You have the right to remain silent, but you don't have the right to ignore the law. And you are ignoring it. This is a story you've probably never heard, but it's one that plays out in cities across America with terrifying regularity. It's about how a routine police stop can explode into a life-or-death nightmare for one of our most vulnerable populations, the deaf and hard of hearing. It's a story about a system that fails to communicate, and officers who mistake disability for defiance. We're going to walk through a scenario that's a composite of dozens of real-world encounters. It involves a deaf black man, dangerously untrained officers, and a situation that spirals into violence. But this is also a story of how it can all be turned around. Because the officers in our story made one critical mistake: they underestimated his mother. We're going to break down how these encounters go so wrong, and provide a playbook for how knowledge, advocacy, and sheer maternal will can tear down a false arrest and expose the truth. While the people are illustrative, the laws, the failures, and the fight for justice are intensely real. Stay with me as we unpack how one woman shut it all down. Every one of these stories starts with a 911 call. It's often vague, based on patchy information, and filtered through the caller's own biases. A call comes in about a disturbance or a suspicious person. The description is flimsy. A man in a dark hoodie. Someone loitering. In our scenario, based on countless real incidents, the call is about a man allegedly involved in a minor dispute at a convenience store. The initial report even described a white male. But by the time officers arrive, that key detail is lost in the shuffle. They're just looking for a man in the area. They spot a black man walking down the street, minding his own business. He fits a generic description that could be a million people. For these officers, on this day, that's enough. They pull up. The interaction begins, and in seconds, the first failure occurs. It's a failure of communication that will stack, one on top of the other, until the entire situation is buried in violence and false charges. After the dust settles, a police report is written. These reports almost always follow a script. If you've read one, you've read them all. The language is designed for one purpose: to legally justify the actions that were taken. You'll see the signature phrases. The subject was non-compliant. The subject ignored lawful verbal commands. He took an aggressive stance. Fearing for my safety, I was forced to deploy my taser. The subject continued to resist arrest. On paper, it looks like a textbook case of a dangerous person who forced the officer's hands. The report details a series of commands that were supposedly ignored and a necessary escalation of force to control a volatile situation. The man gets charged with resisting arrest, and often, something more serious like assaulting an officer. This official narrative, this piece of paper, becomes the whole basis for the legal case. It's the officer's word against the citizen. And for a long time, that was usually enough. The official story is a fortress built of carefully chosen words. But what happens when video doesn't just contradict the story, but demolishes that fortress brick by brick? Now let's rewind and see what the official story leaves out. Let's see it from the man's perspective. He's walking home. He has cerebral palsy, which sometimes affects his gait. He is also profoundly deaf. He doesn't hear the police car pull up. He doesn't hear the doors open. He doesn't hear the first shouts. "Hey! Stop right there. Let me see your hands." All he knows is that suddenly, lights are flashing in his peripheral vision. He turns, startled, and sees two officers approaching, their faces tense, their mouths moving. He can't understand a word. For him, the world is silent. There are no commands. There is only confusion and a rapidly growing knot of fear. He does what deaf people are often taught to do with police. He tries to signal his disability, pointing to his ears and shaking his head. It's a clear, universal gesture. "I can't hear you." But the officers don't see it that way. In their minds, programmed to see non-compliance as a threat, they read this as defiance. He's refusing to listen. He's mocking us. The man sees them getting more agitated and puts his hands up to show he's not a threat. But one hand moves back toward his ear, trying again to communicate the one fact that could change everything. I. Aim. Deaf. To the officers, this is a furtive movement. Their training, which has no meaningful disability awareness, screams at them that this is a precursor to an attack. In their minds, the time for talking is over. What happens next is a blur of violence, all captured on body camera. The first officer closes in and grabs him. The man, shocked and unable to process the silent, sudden assault, instinctively tenses up. This isn't resistance, it's a reflex. But in the police report, it will be called active resistance. The unheard commands continue. Stop resisting. Get on the ground. As they struggle to take him down, his movements, affected by cerebral palsy, are jerky and uncoordinated. These aren't the moves of someone fighting back. They're the movements of a disabled man in panic and pain. The officers see it as flailing. An officer unholsters his taser. The man sees it. He might try to vocalize, to shout, "No ears!" or "I can't hear!" words he himself can't hear. But it's too late. The charge hits him. His body convulses. He's punched repeatedly. The official report will later claim he assaulted an officer. This whole nightmare, from first contact to violent takedown, takes less than a minute. It's a catastrophic failure born from a single root cause: the officer's inability to recognize and accommodate a disability. They weren't fighting a criminal. They were fighting a man they couldn't communicate with. And they documented their failure not as a mistake, but as heroism. The man is in handcuffs, bruised, tasered, and terrified. He's in the back of a squad car, unable to ask what's happening or where he's going. The officers are congratulating themselves on getting a combative suspect off the streets. But then, another car pulls up, and the entire dynamic is about to change. The man's mother has arrived. The police didn't call her, a neighbor did. She doesn't arrive screaming or hysterical. That's what the officers expect. They can dismiss emotion. They can't dismiss cold, hard, informed intelligence. She gets out of her car, phone already up and recording. She walks calmly, but with purpose, toward the senior officer on scene. Her first words aren't a question, but a statement. "My son is deaf. His name is son's name. He has cerebral palsy. What is going on?" The officer gives a standard, dismissive line. "Ma'am, you need to step back. This is an active crime scene. Your son assaulted an officer." The mother doesn't move. "No. My son is deaf. Did you provide him with an interpreter?" The officer is taken aback. This isn't the usual script. "Ma'am, he was non-compliant." She cuts him off, her voice firm, not loud, but carrying undeniable authority. "Non-compliant? Or unable to comply? There's a legal difference. He cannot hear your verbal commands. Did you try to write anything down? Did you use a visual aid? Or did you just immediately resort to violence?" She isn't just a worried mom. She's an informed advocate. She knows his rights. More importantly, she knows their obligations. She continues, her phone steadily recording every word, every badge number. "I assume you're aware of the Americans with Disabilities Act? Title II requires law enforcement to provide effective communication for people with disabilities. That's not a suggestion. It's federal law. By failing to recognize his deafness, you violated his civil rights." The officer's smug confidence begins to crack. He tries to pivot. "Ma'am, he resisted arrest." And this is where she delivers the final blow. She looks him dead in the eye. "You have the right to remain silent, but you don't have the right to ignore the law. And you are ignoring it. You created this by failing in your duty to communicate. Every action you took after he tried to tell you he was deaf was an escalation of your own failure. I want the name of your supervisor. I want an ambulance for my son. And I want a qualified ASL interpreter here immediately, as is his right. All of this is being recorded. Your report will say he resisted. My video will show you brutalized a disabled man." In that moment, the power is completely inverted. The officers, who held all the power just minutes before, are now on the defensive. Their simple story of good cops versus bad guy has been systematically dismantled by a woman armed with nothing more than her phone and her knowledge. She hasn't just shown up. She has taken control. So, how was that mother so sure she was right? Her argument wasn't emotional. It was based on solid federal law. Let's break down exactly why she was 100% correct. The whole issue hinges on two powerful laws: Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. These aren't optional guidelines. They are federal civil rights laws that apply to every single police department in the country. The core principle of the ADA here is effective communication. The law says police must take steps to ensure their communication with people who have disabilities is as effective as their communication with people who don't. Think about that. It means a deaf person has a right to understand and be understood by the police. So what does that actually require? Police have to provide auxiliary aids and services. This can mean a lot of things. Asterisk using pen and paper. Asterisk using gestures or visual aids. Asterisk, and most importantly, for serious situations like an arrest, providing a qualified sign language interpreter. The Department of Justice is crystal clear on this. For a simple traffic ticket, written notes might be enough. But the moment a situation gets serious, like an arrest or interrogation, the need for a qualified interpreter becomes critical. A person's freedom is at stake. And who decides what to use? The law says police have to give primary consideration to the aid requested by the person with the disability. If a person asks for an interpreter, the department has to provide one. Claiming it's an undue burden is almost never a winning argument for a police department, and they can't charge the person for it. Now, let's apply this to our story. The officers gave verbal commands. The man, being deaf, couldn't obey. He tried to tell them he was disabled. Instead of recognizing this, they saw defiance. That was their first legal failure. Their entire case was built on failure to comply with verbal commands. But under the ADA, you can't punish someone for not following commands if you never gave them a way to understand those commands in the first place. The mother knew this. When she asked, non-compliant or unable to comply, she was stating the exact legal question that would destroy the entire case. For years, the Department of Justice has investigated police departments and found patterns of discrimination against people with disabilities, noting that lack of training leads to needless escalation and violence. This isn't a new problem. It's a systemic failure that departments have been warned about for decades. The officers weren't just being impatient, they were violating a man's civil rights. In the wake of the mother's powerful on-scene intervention, the official story started to crumble. The prosecutor's office was faced with a case that was, to put it mildly, unwinnable. On one side, they had the officer's report. On the other, they had the mother's clear video, body cam footage that told a story of panic and confusion, and the mother herself invoking the Americans with Disabilities Act on camera. Any defense attorney would argue the entire arrest was illegal from the moment the officers failed to communicate effectively. The charges, felony assault, resisting arrest, were quietly dropped in October 2024. It was a silent admission that the case was built on sand. The mother's advocacy had worked. She stared down the system and won. But what about accountability? In March of 2025, after an internal investigation, the Phoenix Police Department announced the 3 officers involved would be disciplined. Reports indicated the punishment was a 24-hour unpaid suspension and a requirement to attend more de-escalation training. Let that sink in. For the violent, wrongful arrest of the disabled man, an act that could have cost him years of his life, the reported consequence was a single day off work without pay. This is why the fight doesn't end when the charges are dropped. The next step, which is happening in this case, is a federal civil rights lawsuit filed in March 2025. The lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about forcing the department to change its policies, implement meaningful training on ADA compliance, and ensure what happened to this man never happens to anyone else. It argues this wasn't just about a few bad officers, but a systemic failure of policy, training, and accountability. The story we've walked through today ended with the charges dropped, a testament to a mother who refused to be intimidated. But it started with a failure that should terrify all of us. A failure to listen. A failure to see. A failure to communicate. These incidents are not rare. They're happening on quiet streets and destroying lives. What this story proves is that the most powerful weapon against this kind of injustice is knowledge. That mother won not by shouting, but by knowing the law better than the people paid to enforce it. She knew the ADA is a shield to protect the vulnerable. It also proves a critical lesson: record everything. The gap between the official story and the truth is often massive, and video is the only bridge that can span it. This is a victory, but an incomplete one. True justice would be a system where no mother has to become a legal expert on the side of the road to save her son. True justice is mandatory, recurring, and effective training for every single officer on how to interact with the disabled community. So I want to ask you, what do you think is the single most important step police departments should take to prevent this from happening again? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this story opened your eyes to a problem you didn't know existed, please share this video. The more people who understand their rights and the rights of others, the harder it is for injustice to hide in the silence. Thank you for watching.